Well, my name is THEO Eaves. I'm 94 years of age. The war broke out on the 3rd of September 1939. I was just 16 at the time. My father was in the RAF because he'd been in the First World War in the Royal Flying Corps, and when he came back home from India, where unfortunately he'd spent a long time in hospital with cholera, but he survived that and came back, and eventually when he came back for his usual, he was a jeweller by trade. He came back to his own business for jewellery, but then during the when the war was coming in July of 1939, that's just before the war broke out, all the reserves were called in for their usual fortnight training, and he was called up for his, and he didn't come back till after the war because he was. They brought them in before the war actually opened because they realised, I think, what was going to happen. So I was 16, but I was by the beginning of 1940, I was 17 by that time, and he actually was stationed with the RAF at Staverton, which is between Cheltenham and Gloucester, with a group there. And of course, he wasn't flying now because he was he was nearest getting on for middle age by this time. But he was stationed there, and he managed to wangle me a flight on an Avro Anson, which was used for training from that particular airport at Staverton. Now, that flight was something special because it was actually a practice bombing raid in the Bristol Channel. And when the tide went out, they'd mark a big sort of dartboard in the sands, and they dropped little 12-pound bombs on there, and they I think somebody was ticking off on the side and marking them with the scores, you know. So, of course, with an Avro Anson, there are windows down each side, so I was only about one window back from where the pilot sat, and another member of crew, second pilot it would be. And of course, I had an excellent view of this from the starboard side of the aircraft, looking down as we were coming along to see what was going on. Now, for a lad of barely 17, you can imagine how exciting that was. And I determined that if this war went on a bit longer at that point, that's what I wanted to do, to go to the RAF. And so eventually, I spent a time on the railway actually as a booking and parcels clerk at New Street Station. I'd attended the grammar school, Handsworth Grammar School, but they were evacuated at the beginning of the war, and the whole school more or less went again to somewhere in the Gloucestershire area, and there was just a rump of teachers left. And at that point, of course, it was that dark time when nobody knew what was going to happen. It was obvious that war was coming, and eventually war did come. We were all, as civilians, worried about expecting bombers overhead the next minute and all that sort of thing. And so I decided to leave school. So I didn't do any higher examinations in school at all at the time. And so I left school then, and because I had a sister who was 10 years younger than me, so my mother was left on her own with just my little sister, and my father, of course, was away with the RAF. Now, as you know, it was a quiet period, nothing happened for a while, but then things started, and by 1941, I decided I'd join the RAF, and I was old enough then, at 19, because I wanted to make sure I got into the RAF. I didn't want to be in the Army or the Navy, it had to be the RAF. And so I went up and sort of volunteered for the RAF in November of 41 and was accepted. I was accepted for aircrew. And then in 1942, I was actually sent for on the 20th of March 1942 to be called up for the RAF. So I was trained as a wireless operator. I had to, our first place we went to was Blackpool, actually, where we spent a few weeks there at near Stanley Park. basically learning Morse code, because we had to get up to speeds of something like 20, 22 words a minute to be useful as operators, and learning more about the Morse code. And so I eventually, I had various flying training places which are in my logbook. For instance, we flew quite a bit in training in little small aircraft, which would just hold two people, and they were mostly Proctors, an aircraft called a Proctor, and there was just a pilot with the want-to-be operator. I would sit by the side of him with all my radio up equipment, and the idea was he would fly us around and we would contact the ground by Morse and they would contact us, and so we got used to using Morse. And so that was the sort of training that we had. So I did quite a bit of flying in Proctors, and also in Domini Rapides. Those are those biplanes with pointed wings, which they were still using up to a few years ago to give people holiday trips from Llandurog around North Wales there. So that was interesting as well. But the only problem about those aircraft was a terrible stench of fuel with them. Unfortunately, I was not airsick, but some of the other people in my squadron, my company rather of the squadron, were not affected by those fumes. Anyway, that was our start. Eventually, of course, we qualified as radio operators. We were given our sergeant's stripes, and then we found we were going to be sent overseas. We went overseas, first of all, to the Middle East. We landed at Port Said, and we actually, and on the way there, I don't know why the Air Ministry did it, but they, instead of, when we set out and headed out into the Atlantic for about 3 days. And we thought we're all going to Canada, this is great, or somewhere like that. But then it sharply turned left and went back towards the Mediterranean. Why they thought we wouldn't be noticed, I don't know. This was a troop ship called the Orion that we were on, a big troop ship. And we went through, of course, and when you go through the Straits of Gibraltar and so on, it was pretty obvious that we were coming through. Unfortunately, we were escorted, of course, by the Royal Navy. The convoy was attacked by a number of the escorting ships, and also other cargo ships that were part of our convoy were sunk, and we had a bit of a rough time coming through the Mediterranean. Anyway, eventually got to Port Said, and then from there we were moved to Alexandria for a while, and then from there we were then moved down the Canal Zone to a place called Akia on the Canal Zone, where we did our final get-together as a crew. We crewed up on the way out. The great thing about the RAF was they didn't put you into crews. They said, sort yourselves out, and so there was a great crowd of us aircrew on there, and we sorted ourselves out into a crew. We knew we wanted 5 members for a Wellington, so we sorted ourselves out in that way. So by the time we got to North Africa, we were ready as a crew. And of course we had to learn to fly together, because you can't fly a Wellington on a bombing permission without 5 people there to do all the various things that require doing. And so we did our final training down at Akia on the Canal Zone. We were then taken by a ship called Batory, which was an old German luxury liner, I believe, and we crossed on that. Now, I was fortunate there, being a wireless operator, I volunteered for radio duty in the wireless cabin on the boat, so I was treated as a member of a crew. So I got rather more, I think I got rather better food than the rest of them, and a better place to sleep and so on. So that was good on the way out. Of course, we landed in southern Italy at Taranto, and the amazing sight there was some beautiful battleships, all sorts. The Italian fleet was all there, absolutely magnificent ships who daren't go out to sea because they hadn't got radar, and as soon as they popped their noses out, they'd be attacked by the aircraft. They were sort of pinned in the port there. And so anyway, we landed at Taranto, and we went to Foggia first of all, where we did 12 trips of Foggia, from Foggia. At that point, as I think I already said, the rear gunner, unfortunately, his nerve went, and we had to be relieved of aircrew duties, and we had a new replacement. Charlie came along, and then we were taken after Foggia, the trips at Foggia. Our particular squadron, 142 Squadron and 150 Squadron, which were paired with us, we moved to a little place called San Severo, which was a small market town in the south of Italy, by which time the Germans had been pushed up somewhere past Naples. And from there we did all our raids. And the raids that we did, we flew into France. We attacked targets in France and in Germany and in Italy and in Greece, and also the other way we went into Yugoslavia, Hungary and Romania from the southern tip of Italy. So that was my bombing command missions show that in my logbook, that what we did there. I did 35 bombing commissions. Some of them were rather interesting. For instance, on one occasion we were attacking the Hermann Göring tank factory. We all prayed that the gentleman would be at home in his factory, but unfortunately he wasn't. But it would have been nice if he had been. It might have brought the war to an end a little quicker, I don't know. And other things that we did, as you'll see in the logbook, for instance, on one occasion we were dropping mines. That was a bit of a scary thing because we had to drop mines in the River Danube because to block the barge traffic was bringing supplies back and forwards from Hungary and Romania, oil particularly from Romania, and taking things out there, and we had to try to drop these mines in the sea, which would probably hold up the traffic for about a week or maybe a fortnight. But that was a little victory. It would hold the war effort, the German war effort up for that particular time. Now, to drop a mine from a Wellington, you have to fly below 50 feet. Now, 50 feet is not very high, 4 or 5 stories in a building. We were coming in at that height. We had to come, and we were coming in at 240, 250 miles an hour, and we had to lay our mines in the sea there. And then we had to get away fairly quickly. You can imagine it was a bit risky because there's all sorts of masts and things sticking up on a big river, pylons and what have you. You know, it was a bit difficulty. The danger was collision there, and anyway, we came through it all right, and we all used to say, fortunately, if we're going quickly, the people on either side of the river, the anti-aircraft guns will all be pointing up into the sky. And by the time they've got down level with us, we'll be away, That was the sort of comforts the fun that we had as a crew. And that was there. In the raids that we did, and of course on the way out to any raid, we would be attacked where possible by ground fire. And also, of course, enemy aircraft would be hanging around looking for us. It was all our work, of course, was at night. But on a moonlight night and a clear night, you could see a fair way, actually. And of course, when we left the target, we would have the same thing. They would wait for us. The fighters would wait for us outside the target so as we could try and get some of us coming out. And the anti-aircraft, again, on the way back. Because all the way from southern Italy right across to targets like France or Germany or Hungary or Romania or Greece or whatever, you were over enemy territory the whole time. So you never quite knew when something was going to happen. You could always tell if the gunners were getting accurate because you could hear the explosion of the shell. Now, normally the noise of the aircraft and what was going on would drown that out. But if you heard that explosion, you knew they're pretty accurate down there, and the pilot would have to make a few quick swerves over to port or starboard to get us away as soon as he could. And so these are the sort of things that we did. Much of the attacks that we made were on oil wells or oil installations, on factories. Some were on troop concentrations, but the majority on railway lines, of course. Means of communication were probably some of the main things to try to do to hold up the war effort for the Germans. And remember that wherever we were, Hungary, Germany, Greece, whatever, Yugoslavia, the people in charge there were the Germans, and they knew the business. It wasn't necessarily the local troops. The Italians soon disappeared out of the war, as you will know, and they were all sizzled back into ordinary civilian life. So at the end of the war, I came out. I got married in 1946. My wedding photographs are there, 25th of May 1946. And I'd been engaged to Marion, my wife, for about 3 years. I'd met her back in Birmingham area, because that's where we were living, at Sutton Coldfield, not far from Birmingham area. And I met her there at a youth club, and that was how we got to know each other. We decided to get engaged, but we'd wait till after the war before we got married.